everyone. I'm Abigail. This is Megan, and welcome to another Two Kids interview.
Today we're joined by middle grade author Jake Burt.
Mr. Burt has written the wonderful books Greetings from Witness Protection, The Right Hook of Devin Velma, The Tornado,
Cleopatra and the Body Electric, and The Ghoul of Windytown Vale. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Your books are for middle grade kids like us.
Thank you for that.
Why is that the age group that you enjoy writing for?
So for 22 years, I was a fifth grade teacher or a teacher of elementary and middle school. And so when I think about the types of people who I like to write for, my ideal audience, it is the same kids that I taught for all those years. And I'd like to think that at least some of that experience rubbed off on me well enough that I can hopefully write believable middle grade characters because I was surrounded by them for so many years. So really, those are my favorite people and thus who I enjoy writing for.
Yesterday, we interviewed Beth McMullen, and she told us that we should ask you
what inspired him to write Greetings from Witness Protection.
Beth is a good friend of mine. Thanks for the question, Beth. So Greetings from Witness Protection's idea came about while I was teaching, and it happened when I was taking, or when my students were taking a standardized test. Have either of you ever had to take one of those tests where it seems like everybody in the state has to take it, and you either take it on a computer or you're filling in little bubbles? Great. Most kids do, I think. And so while my students were taking that test, I was walking around watching them take the test, which, as you can probably guess, is pretty boring for the teacher that has to proctor one of those tests. So to keep myself amused while I was just watching my students take this hour-long test, I asked myself, for which one of my students does this test carry the highest stakes? Because educators often call standardized tests high stakes testing because sometimes they can determine whether or not a kid moves on to the next grade in some states and in some cases. So I asked myself that question, for whom does it have the highest stakes? And for my kids in that classroom, none of them really had very high stakes because our school didn't use it as a benchmark test about whether or not we were going to pass the kids. But that's where this character jumped into my head, Nikki. And Nikki answered the question for me. And she said, "Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm a 13-year-old girl. And if I fail my standardized test, my whole family might get murdered." I was like, "Oh, well, how does that happen?" And of course, I'm constructing this narrative in my head, right? It's not like I'm hearing voices or something like that, like a spirit from the beyond is talking to me. It's not like that. But I started to construct this story in my head about what type of situation would have a standardized test mean literal life or death for a kid. And that's where the notion of a kid in the witness protection program came from, where if she got a perfect score on the test, that would draw attention to her and her family, which is what they don't want. And if she fails the test or does poorly on it, teachers will start wanting to try to help her. They'll look into her family background, which is, again, something that a kid in witness protection would not want. So that's where that part of the story came from. And from that basic idea, I built out the rest of the narrative.
The Tornado is a book about bullying. Why is that important for you to write the book?
The Tornado is my most personal book that I've ever written because when I was in third, fourth, and fifth grades, I was bullied. I moved from Columbus, Ohio to Cincinnati, Ohio. And as you can expect, when you're the new kid at the school, it can be hard to make friends. And you also can become a target of kids who are not so nice and who, when they're that young, they don't necessarily know how to interact with the new kid. So some kids were very friendly to me. One kid was not. And the things that kid did to me when he was bullying me are the things that I put into the book. Everything that the bully in that book does to my main character is something that my bully did to me when I was in elementary school. So I used that experience to write The Tornado. But the critical part of it, and the most personal part, the one that was hardest for me to write, was the fact that my main character, Belle, in the book, sees the bully antagonizing somebody else. There's a new kid at the school. It's not Belle, but the bully is attacking this new kid. And because Belle is so scared of having the bully turn around and bully him again, he stays quiet and doesn't help that new person. That same thing happened to me when I was a kid. Eventually, my bully found a new target and started bullying somebody new. And I didn't say a word. I was so scared. And the feeling of guilt from not doing the right thing, not standing up, stayed with me for 30, 35 years until I finally got up the courage to kind of write The Tornado as almost as an apology for not doing the right thing when I was a kid.
What gave you the inspiration to write Daylin? I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce her name.
Yeah. So Daylin is that new kid in the book. She moves from out west to Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where I grew up. So the book is set in the same town that I grew up in. And the idea for her came from a few places. The first, you can kind of guess based on her initials. Her initials are DG. Her name is Daylin Gower. And those initials just so happen to also be the initials of Dorothy Gale, the main character from The Wizard of Oz, and or at least the movie version of The Wizard of Oz, based on L. Frank Baum's books, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and others. That's one of over 60 references in the book, hidden Easter eggs to The Wizard of Oz, because it is, in a way, a Wizard of Oz story. A kid is transported to a brand new place that seems strange and unusual, and they have to figure out how to survive in that new place. And so that's Daylin's journey. She's not the main character, though. The main character is Belle Kirby, who stands in place for the Cowardly Lion. Who has to pluck up his courage to be able to help Daylin, aka Dorothy Gale, there. But that was the inspiration for Daylin. If you look at the patches that she wears on her jacket and pants, they're all Wizard of Oz references, and there's dozens more throughout the book.
I know one Wizard of Oz. This might be a spoiler, and it might be edited out because no spoilers. But I know that in.
Do you want to hear a couple more references that are not spoilers? Sure. Great. So Belle's best friend is named Timmy. His full name is Timmy Corver. And if you look at the Latin upon which Timmy Corver's name is based, the word timor in Latin means fear or scare. And Corver is an approximation of the Latin word corvus, meaning crow. So Timmy Corver's name in Latin is Scarecrow. And Belle's other friend is named Tam, but his full name is Nan Tam Nguyen, which in Vietnamese translates to the Heartless One, aka the Tin Woodsman, who is missing a heart.
But when I was reading the book, I never picked up on those.
You have to go back and read it again and see what else you can pick up on.
Maybe. But
we're not.
It's like you need to dig deeper and deeper just to find those little references that make the book so much funner.
Precisely. And even if only one kid reading it gets the references, I'm pleased.
A lot of authors stay with one genre. Clearly you don't.
You've written on social themes, a mystery book, a science fiction book.
Do you have a favorite genre?
I do. I'm going to split it into two genres. My favorites are science fiction and fantasy. I think one of the reasons why fantasy literature has so many fans is that it can be and do so many things. It can touch on so many themes, really an infinite number of themes in an infinite number of ways. So there's fantasy literature for everyone. I guess you could say the same thing for realistic middle grade contemporary and any other genre, but I think fantasy is the most obvious one. You know, oh, you don't like wizards and witches? Well, I got dragons over here. Oh, you don't like dragons? How about ghosts? Oh, you don't like ghosts? Well, let's try elves. And we can just keep going. There's an unlimited number of things that magic can do. And so you might wonder, Jake, why did it take you so long to write a science fiction book, Cleo Porter and the Body Electric, and a fantasy book, The Ghoul of Windy Down Vale? And my honest response to that is I was scared. I grew up idolizing the authors of the science fiction and fantasy books that I read as a kid that made me fall in love with not just those genres, but reading and writing in the first place. And so it was very hard for me to think of myself in the same breath, you know, even in the same career as those authors that I loved so very much. So it took me 3 books to drum up the courage to be able to put pen to paper, so to speak, to write science fiction and fantasy. But those are my favorite genres.
What is your process when putting a book together?
Do you decide the end before the middle?
Or do you put it together in order?
I put it together in order. I am what we call a plotter. I don't know if any other authors have talked to you about whether they are plotters or pantsers, but I'm a plotter, which means that I sit down and before I'm ready to write a manuscript, before I'm ready to actually type chapter 1, I need to have the whole thing outlined. So a chapter outline from start to finish. I need to have bio pages for all of my characters, and I need to have maps that I've drawn for every setting that the characters are going to visit. And that might seem a little obsessive, but it's actually a fail safe for me. And what I mean by that is that any author who's going to write a novel, full-length novel, needs to be ready to spend a year, 2 years, 3 years with that story and those characters. So they darn well better love that story and those characters, because it would be a tragedy, in my mind at least, to get 6 months into the process of working on a book and realize that you hate the story. All that outlining, all that character biography, all that mapping I do is essentially my way of making sure that I am in love with that story enough to want to see it through to the very end. So I put all that out there as a plotter. A pantser, aka somebody who just writes by the seat of their pants, is one of those people that can just pop open their laptop anywhere, look at a blank page, and just start going without any prep work, and then look back afterwards and say, oh, what I've written here is actually a decent idea and I can do something with this. Or, oh, what I've just written here is straight garbage. I need to throw that away and try something new. I'm too afraid to do that. I've got to have my outlines.
I think with my mystery comics, I'm in the middle of that because I just write everything down and I kind of do it from beginning to end, kind of.
A planter.
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect. Yep.
Other than the tornado, can you tell us about something you saw happen in real life that you put into one of your books?
Yes. I'm going to talk about perhaps my most controversial book now, Cleo Porter and the Body Electric, which is about a girl who grows up after a devastating pandemic that killed 99% of the people on Earth. And so you might be thinking, Jake, did you copy this off of COVID-19 and that pandemic and all the lockdowns and things there? Actually, no. Though I did base the book off of my experience with a pandemic. It wasn't COVID-19. The book came out in the middle of COVID-19. Unlucky me to have the pandemic book come out during the pandemic. But I wrote it 2 years before COVID-19 was even a thing. And so I had to base all of my information and all of my experience that I put into Cleo Porter and the Body Electric on my experience with a different pandemic. I lived in China in 2003 when the SARS epidemic hit. And it wasn't such a big deal here in the United States, but in China, SARS was huge. It caused a major panic. We were on lockdown. I had to submit my temperature to the government every day. We had to have all of our water brought into us in special sealed jugs. We couldn't go out. We couldn't go grocery shopping or to restaurants. We had to cancel all our travel plans. And so my model of how Cleo's society dealt with their pandemic is based off of what I experienced in China and how that government dealt with the pandemic.
Did the publisher think about waiting to release your book because of COVID and how people might react?
We definitely had that conversation, but we ended up deciding that we felt that families and classrooms could use a way to talk about what everyone was going through. And my publisher thought that Cleo Porter and the Body Electric would be a good way to help kids have that conversation, partially because when you first set foot in Cleo's world, it's not in the middle of a pandemic. It's 80 years after that pandemic. So you don't have to deal with the reality of all the sickness and hardship that we went through during the COVID-19 pandemic, but you can still talk about some of the results of a pandemic and how people react to that very scary situation, even though you've got that removal within Cleo's story.
Rejection is part of most writers' stories. Can you tell us about that part of your journey?
Absolutely. It's part of mine as well. I think a lot of authors who you talk to will admit that the first book that they ever got published is not the first book that they ever wrote. That's the case for me as well. Greetings from Witness Protection is my first published novel. It came out in 2017. I wrote my first novel in 2014. And that novel was a 584-page YA fantasy book. And it's so bad that rather than go back and revise it and try to get it published, I have since written 6 other books just because I get so intimidated by how much work I would need to do on that first novel. But after I wrote that first novel, I realized I'm sorry, I said it was in 2014. That's actually when I started writing Greetings from Witness Protection. I wrote this book, this big, clunky YA book, in 2006, actually. The and it never went anywhere. But I got the notion after I wrote it that, hey, this is something I can do. I can write a book. So I wrote another one. And that one I did send query letters out to agents for. That one I took to conferences. I joined the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI. And I tried to get that book published. And I got rejected. It has never seen the light of day. It's never hit library shelves. No kid but my own has ever read it. But one of the things that happened as I was trying to work on that book is I went to a conference and I got to talk to a literary agent, and she said, Jake, I love your writing. I love this story. I would take it in a heartbeat if it was in first person perspective. It wasn't. It was in third person perspective. And so I took hope from that and I took heart from that. But I wasn't going to completely rewrite this book from third person perspective to first person perspective because I felt too much would get lost in that translation. What it did do, though, is it inspired me to write my third novel in first person present perspective and tense. And it's that novel, Greetings from Witness Protection, that ended up getting me my agent and my publisher and led to me being published. So that piece of advice I got as I was being rejected on that second novel was what helped me better craft my writing to actually break through and become a published author.
So you were writing for the wrong age group. You should stay away from young adult and stick to middle grade.
But we'd be young adult in 4 years?
True. A few more middle grade and then young adult.
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan.
We've noticed that a lot of your middle grade authors seem to know each other.
And it also seems that there are not rivalries between them, and actually the opposite. They root each other on.
Are we right about this? And if so, why do you think middle grade authors get along so well?
You are 100% correct about this. I have never met another author with whom I have felt a rivalry. I've always felt a kinship. And yes, when a customer goes into the bookstore or goes on a bookstore's website to buy a book, we realize that they don't have infinite amounts of money and they got to make a choice. Are they going to buy Jake Burt's book? Are they going to buy Beth's book? Are they going to buy Christina Soen Tornvat's book, or James Ponti's book, or Stuart Gibbs's book? They've got a choice, and we all write for middle grade readers. But the brilliant thing about what we do, and in more broadly what authors do, is that once a kid becomes a reader, they don't stick with one book. They read lots of stuff. And so, as an author, I don't care how you fell in love with reading. I just care that you fall in love with reading. So if you fall in love with reading and become a reader, a lifelong lover of stories because of one of my books, I will scream hallelujah to the rooftops. That is one of my ultimate goals, is to do that for a kid. But if you fell in love with books because of another author's book, that is totally fine by me, because, like I said, you won't stop with that one book that made you fall in love with reading. It will make you want more books. And then you'll read those books and you'll want more books. You'll want more stories. And eventually, hopefully, you'll make your way around to Jake Burt books. But that's the wonderful and beautiful thing about what we do as middle grade authors, because we're getting in almost at the ground level. Picture books are out there too, sure. Chapter books are out there too, sure. But most kids I talk to and most adults I talk to who love reading fell in love with reading right around your age, right around middle school, when you can really start to get into more complex stories. And when you're interacting with the story yourself, it's just you and the story, not a grown-up reading the story out loud to you and filtering the story through. I think that moment where you find a story you love because you read it by yourself is a magical moment. And if that moment can drive you toward more moments because you're picking up all of our books, us as an industry, us as a collective of authors, all trying to provide these experiences for kids, then I think that's genius. That's brilliant, and it's the best business model I can possibly imagine.
Okay, really funny thing. 3 out of the 4 authors we've already interviewed that you said.
So I was name dropping people you've already talked to.
Yeah, we interviewed Stuart Gibbs and James Ponti.
Good friends of mine. We're all, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but we're all members of a group called the Renegades of Middle Grade, because we love each other's books and we love working with each other to promote each other and to promote a love of reading for kids. We've all kind of hooked up, and we're in the Renegades of Middle Grade together. And so if you're looking for other authors to interview, just go on the Renegades of Middle Grade website and take a look. I'm sure any and all of us will be delighted to talk to you. And go outside of Renegades of Middle Grade too, because all middle grade authors are great. But it's a great source for books and for authors to talk to, because we're all really friendly.
Out of all the instruments in the world, why were you attracted to the banjo?
These are excellent questions. In fact, I have, like, literally on hand at any given time, I've got a banjo right next to me. The reason why I love the banjo is because my dad. My dad is a huge fan of bluegrass music, and so when we were growing up, we listened to bluegrass around the house. Most specifically, a guy named John Hartford. John Hartford passed away a while ago, but his style of banjo playing seemed like magic to me. I'm nowhere near as good as he was, but for my 30th birthday, my wife bought me a banjo, and I've been picking ever since.
We have interviewed a number of authors who have had books banned.
This means in some parts of the country, kids don't have the same access to books that we have and may not be able to see themselves represented in books or a window into the others people's lives.
Can you give us your thoughts on this?
Ooh, yes, I can. I have to be very careful because I work for a company right now called The Juice Learning, and my job is to write the news for kids every day. This is my first year out of the classroom in 22 years. But now I get to do what I love, which is write for kids every day. We publish 5 articles a day, every day. But because I'm now part of the media, it restricts what I can say about complicated political and social events. Book banning is definitely one of those. So the first thing I can do for you is acknowledge that that is a very complicated issue. What I will say, though, and this might give away where I stand on this anyway, even though I'm trying to couch this as politically neutral as I can, is that over my 22 years as a teacher, I saw my students blossom, benefit, thrive when they had access to as many stories as they possibly could have, especially those that allowed them, as you suggested, to get a window into other people's lived experiences that might be different from what they knew. And so, as a teacher, I tried to stock my classroom library with as diverse a collection as I could possibly find. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think that tells us enough.
Okay.
What writers have had the most influence on your work?
Probably too many to list here in this interview without keeping you up way past your bedtimes. But in brief, I will say the single author that has had the greatest influence on my writing is J.R.R. Tolkien. Because that's the guy who wrote the book that made me fall in love with storytelling. It's The Hobbit, no surprise there. I think you talk to a lot of people of my generation. The Hobbit was the first book I remember my dad reading to me and my brothers when I was a kid. He did all the voices. He had troll voices. He had a Gandalf voice. He had a Gollum voice. And I was captivated. I have since read it every year since I was a little kid. And every time I read it, I discover something new or something different delights me. Bilbo's character arc in The Hobbit is still my template for how I want my characters in my books to develop and find themselves on their journey. So I'll leave it with J.R.R. Tolkien, but there's so many authors that I love out there that I could name.
What advice do you have for young writers?
My single biggest piece of advice for young writers is find people to read your stuff. I've always loved writing, but I didn't realize that I wanted to make it a career until I found people who were willing to read my stuff and be honest about it. And they told me, yeah, this is good, Jake, but there's stuff that you can improve. And that's how I think I became good enough to deserve to have my books read by the most discerning audience in the world, middle grade readers. But it took me going out there and finding people willing to critique my stuff. It's like the story I told you about the agent I met at that conference who told me, you need to write in first person, Jake. That I only got that advice because I was willing to let her read what I've written. And as a teacher, the thing that I had to dispossess my students of was that desire to hunker over their writing and hide it. You know, you've probably seen kids do this. You may even do it yourself, where the teacher's walking around and they want to see what you're writing, but you don't want the teacher to see what you're writing. So you put your arm over it and you write underneath your arm like that. I tried to get my kids not to do that so that I could give them meaningful feedback on my work. But that takes courage to be willing to do that, because anything you write is basically your brain baby. And you don't want your brain baby to be called ugly by other people. So it takes a leap of faith, but I encourage young writers to take that leap. And yes, your mother and your father are going to be very, very nice about your writing, and they're going to tell you it's beautiful, but you need to find the people that are going to tell you, oh, this is beautiful, but.
It's kind of like when a teacher passes by. No.
Yep, you got it.
Can you tell us about a project you are working on now?
Sure can. It's working slowly because, like I said, with my new job, I write every day for hours. So it can be hard to turn around and then say, now at night, I'm going to write another 2 hours on a book. But slowly but surely, I'm working on my sixth novel. Its title right now, titles change all the time, but the title right now is The Third Wish. And it's a fantasy story about a kid who had 3 wishes and blew them. He wished for terrible things. Nothing worse than his third wish, which made his entire family disappear. Now he's on a quest to find another kid who has been given 3 wishes before that kid uses up all their wishes so that he can beg them to reverse his terrible wishes.
It kind of reminds me of when Kevin from Home Alone wishes that his family goes away.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that, only they're not like in Chicago.
Finally, it's time for our Turbo 10.
10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Number 1, what is your favorite phrase to use?
My favorite phrase to use is anything involving the word just. I use it way too much.
Number 2, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Deep sea creatures.
Number 3, what's your go-to snack food?
Pomegranates.
Number 4, what was your favorite book growing up?
The Hobbit.
Number 5, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where do you go?
Disney World.
Number 6, what if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
The ability to craft my own afterlife.
Number 7, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Voltron.
Number 8, what's your favorite rainy day activity?
Playing video games.
Number 9, if you could have any 3 dinner guests, who'd they be?
No rules.
Dinner guests. I will go with Tori Amos. She is a musician. My mother, who has passed away, and my daughter, who has not passed away.
Finally, number 10, what's the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Never take away someone's hope. It may be all they've got.
You were awesome. Thank you so much for doing.
And thank you so much for spending this time with us.
We can't wait to read your future books.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.